Good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Lewis. I'm a partner or member of the law firm of Clark Hill Strasburger, and I am honored today to moderate this distinguished panel to talk about an issue that is fueling the domestic manufacture and distribution of counterfeit drugs. And thanks to the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators, and the Partnership for Safe Medicines for taking on a very interesting topic and doing a deep dive with respect to pill presses and how pill presses play a role with respect to the proliferation of counterfeit drugs. And in addition, today we are releasing a white paper that details the review of pill presses. And in furtherance of that, let me give you a little bit of background about my experience. Prior to joining the firm of Clark Hill Strasburger and going into private practice, I was a federal prosecutor for 21 years with the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Texas. And in 2005 was my first encounter dealing with counterfeit drugs. And at that time, the common method for the distribution of counterfeit drugs was importation of those drugs from China, India, and other countries through the internet. And then those drugs were either transshipped to individuals within the United States and then further distributed. So at that time, law enforcement could monitor the internet and determine individuals who were offering these drugs for sale and then set up a mechanism for investigation. Fast forward within the last 3 or 4 years, the pill presses have caused a sea change. The pill presses and the availability of fentanyl has changed the game with respect to investigations. And so the 3 stakeholders wanted to take a look at pill presses. I am honored today to moderate a very distinguished panel. Here as a former member of the judiciary, members or former members of law enforcement, stakeholders, and victim and patient advocates, all here to talk about pill presses and counterfeit medicines. So I'd like to go to the slides. And the first thing is to determine, first of all, what is a pill press? Some individuals don't have a clue as to what is a pill press. What does it look like? How is that pill press obtained and received in the hands of criminals? And Your Honor has just passed me what looks like a toy that your kids may play with and figure out how to decipher what it is. This is actually a 3D printed pill press. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. But in doing, or at least in working on this white paper, what were some of the questions that we were seeking, or they were seeking to answer? And some of those questions are concerning the continued investigation of individuals who are trafficking in counterfeit drugs, and the increased number of seizures of pill presses, and why in those situations there were prosecutions of individuals, but not for the possession of pill presses. Another question is, are pill presses illegal to own? Are they illegal to use? And what are the laws that govern the use and possession of pill presses? Are there any impediments to prosecution of individuals for possession of pill presses? How do criminals actually get their hands on pill presses? And then, how do they learn how to use the pill press? And then lastly, how do they obtain the ingredients to make those pill presses? And we'll talk about all those aspects because that is fueling this opioid crisis in this epidemic with respect to counterfeit drugs, and lastly, its devastating impact. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a slide of pill presses from the very basic to one that is very sophisticated. The very first one, if you look at it, it would look like something that you would find in someone's garage that's used to a drill press, something that you would press down. And this particular pill press is one that you can acquire over the internet for basically a few $100s. The second one is a pill press that you can find on Amazon for around $2,000, free shipping. The third is a pill press that could produce between 220,000 to 270,000 pills per hour. And that is an astounding figure. And lastly, number 4 is a model that is the most sophisticated and costs about $26,000. But the idea is for a relatively small investment, an individual can acquire these pill presses that were determined to be readily available and have a tremendous return on their profit. Next slide, please. In addition to having these pill presses readily available on the internet, it's interesting that those who are advertising pill presses for sale also understand that the basis for the individuals who are going to acquire, what they're going to use it for. Look at what's labeled there for customs clearance easily. So it tells the buyers, don't worry, we can help you get past customs. If you don't already have an avenue for getting past customs, we can help you. We will break it up into smaller quantities, and we have experience because we have shipped those throughout the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, Russia, Germany, India, the Netherlands, and Brazil. So does this also cause or add to the concern about pill presses, how the distributors understand what is going to be, what these pill presses are going to be used for? So what were the findings with respect to the white paper and discussion of pill presses? Can we go to the next slide, please? These are important findings. One is that the pill presses were broadly available for sale and then virtually untracked, which poses a concern for law enforcement who is trying to get a handle on the source and use of pill presses. And this broad availability for sale would allow individuals who are novice makers to have make millions of dollars and make millions of doses of pills that look exactly like the authentic drug. We'll talk about that as well. That the possession of a pill press without the mold, which is key to make it look like the true drug, at most is a violation of Drug Enforcement Administration's registration requirements that carry no jail time. And because of these, disruption of pill presses would pose a challenge. What are some of the unexpected findings? And that's where this comes into play. In conducting interviews with seasoned law enforcement veterans, the organizations learned that there are CAD files, computer-assisted design files, online and have been around for a long time that could help in development in making a pill press. Now, this pill press is one that is very basic, and the research indicates that they don't produce a very sophisticated or very good pill. But because of technology and the continual evolvement of technology, that is a concern for law enforcement, that someone could either make it themselves or could request companies to make components of these and then to put it together themselves, because the instructions for use, and I didn't cover that in the previous slide, but the distributors of pill presses also have videos on how to use the pill press. So you have all that information on the internet, and then with the avenue and the availability of fentanyl, it is a very dangerous situation having all these components to come together. Now, at this time, I'd like to confer with, and I have to call him Your Honor because he is a former member of Judiciary, the Honorable Louis Freeh, because I believe you have a unique perspective as a member of the Judiciary and also as heading one of the largest federal law enforcement agencies. Can you give us your perspective on what you found when you did a paper concerning importation of drugs?
Yeah, no, certainly, Sam. Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here with you today. And let me just begin first by paying my respects to the moms and the family members who have lost loved ones based on the epidemic and the crisis that we're talking about today. And, you know, we had this terrible terrorist attack in New Zealand last week. And since 9/11, not just this country, but the entire world has taken enormous steps to combat terrorism, affecting everybody's life and travel. And when you compare that to what's been done to deal with this crisis, I mean, it's really negligible. And yet, you know, more young men, young women, not so young men and women have died as a result of these overdoses, dangerous drugs, counterfeit drugs, than all the terrorist victims in the history of the United States. So it's really a misplaced focus, I think, by our government, and certainly a unaddressed crisis. So maybe, Sam, I'll talk for a few minutes about the larger picture and then get back to your excellent white paper on the pill presses. So the larger crisis is really the importation, the massive increase of importation of illegal drugs, whether they be counterfeit medicines or dangerous drugs like fentanyl, and the impact that's having not just on people's lives, but on the safety of our medical and pharmaceutical supply chain. So we have a closed medical supply chain in the United States, which means licensed pharmacists dispense drugs which are inspected and safely monitored by the FDA and other state agencies. And what we're seeing now, based on the study that we did in 2017 for the Partnership for Safe Medicines, who I commend along with the other two sponsors here for focusing on this, we found an alarming increase in the number of imported medicines, drugs coming into the United States. And the reaction so far by the government, the United States government, and the Florida government, which I'll talk about in a second, has been really, in our view, inadequate and ineffective. You know, the idea that you can get cheap pharmaceuticals from Canada is really an illusion. It's actually misleading to people, because when you peel away the first layers of that headline, we find out that pharmaceuticals are not made in Canada. Canada has never made pharmaceuticals. These are drugs which are manufactured in different places, in some countries where we wouldn't drink the water, transshipped to Canada and then distributed here in the United States. The Canadian government has stressed that it does not inspect, look at, or in any way monitor the safety or quality of these drugs. They're flooding into our markets and into our young people's hands and usage. And the number of deaths, not just the very sad ones represented here, but around the country, are increasing at an alarming rate. The fentanyl crisis, the opioid crisis, and now the DEA is telling us a new meth crisis, which we're supposed to expect in the next few years. and the efforts and the result have really been inadequate. Florida is a perfect example. So how is Florida reacting to this crisis? Well, it's got two pieces of legislation that would literally open the floodgates of foreign-made, uninspected, unsafe medicines and drugs coming into the United States. The Senate bill actually, headlines this as a Canadian supplier chain. Well, we know that the pharmaceuticals are not going to be made in Canada. They're going to be transshipped through Canada. And the House bill is probably worse because it says we can bring in medicines manufactured anywhere in the world as long as the U.S. has an agreement with that country that they'll provide safe medicines, which is a ridiculous assumption. Who's going to enforce that? Who's going to inspect it? Who's going to guarantee that? And both statutes, I used to be a judge, so once in a while I would read statutes. Both statutes are glaringly deficient. I was reading it last night. I thought I was missing a few pages because I said, well, where is the criminal penalties? There aren't any. Where are the anti-fraud penalties? There aren't any. Where is the resources? There isn't any. And by the way, who's going to inspect and look at this infrastructure to make sure it's working honestly and safely? Well, it's not in the statute. So maybe they need to add a few pages to it. Maybe they need to rethink the whole focus and look at something that's going to work and going to be effective. The pill presses, which we're talking about today, are just another symptom. Many of these are made overseas, and although you're supposed to register them with the DEA, if you're making fentanyl in your kitchen, you're probably not going to tell the DEA that you've got one of these. And it's a very dangerous item, which, as Sam said, is not criminalized in terms of possession. So if this was an unloaded gun and I had it, maybe not in Florida, but in some places, I'd be arrested. And I would say, well, it's got no bullets in it. Well, this doesn't have any pills or fentanyl in it yet, but it's as dangerous as an unloaded gun in the wrong hands. So if there is an intent that you can show that I'm going to use this in an illegal way, the mere possession should be criminalized. And that's like a baby step that could be taken in an area where we need some assistance. So I think we're behind the 8 ball here. Statutes like the one in Florida are not only deceptive, but they're distracting and they're counterproductive. Let's protect our closed, safe pharmaceutical supply chain. Let's put some resources into it. Let's find ways to cut the costs of pharmaceuticals, which is very important. Maybe we should eliminate the middlemen, these pharmaceutical benefit brokers who operate in an opaque shadow between the people buying pharmaceuticals and the supplier. Maybe we don't need them, or maybe we can reduce the cost and get some savings in a safe way. But it's not smart to try to get savings with medicines and drugs that we're going to put into our bodies and our families' bodies. Would anybody here get on a plane that was made in a foreign country but not inspected by anybody? Why would you put medicine in your body or your family's body, which is actually more dangerous under difficult situations? So I want to thank the panel here, particularly my respect and prayers for the moms and for the sponsors of this important event.
Thank you for those comments, Your Honor. Would you, based on your comments, would you say that the availability of pill presses make the situation getting better based upon law enforcement's interdiction efforts, or made worse as a result of the pill presses?
I think it's made worse. We were talking before, one of my colleagues here took this device to our customs, and although they asked questions about it, the customs officer had no idea what this was. It had to be explained to the officer that this was used to make pills, and the question was, well, is this dangerous? And the answer was no, but that's not really an accurate answer, but it got them through the customs. So yeah, the availability, the easy access, and There's even a section of your paper, which I thought was really fascinating, about the 3D production of these presses, which maybe is not perfected, but if the materials are different, it would be. So it's an epidemic proportion threat, and we're not doing much to deal with it.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to talk to George Karavetsos. George, would you tell us a little bit about your background and your involvement with investigations of counterfeit drugs?
Sure. Thank you. It's a great honor and privilege to be here today to talk about such an important issue. My background is I was an attorney with the Chief Counsel's Office at the FDA and worked on the compliance and regulatory issues that involve the security of the domestic drug supply chain. After that, I went on to be a federal prosecutor in Miami for 13 years, where I continued to work on cases involving FDA-related violations to include counterfeit drugs, medical devices, food supply chain security issues. I concluded my federal career as the director of FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. I would hope by now, it's been in existence for 26 years, that the public would know the important work that FDA OCI does. It's an elite group within FDA of federal law enforcement special agents, 300 agents spread out throughout the country, in a charge to enforce violations of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And that responsibility is an awesome one, because not only is it protecting the food supply from potential issues of intentional adulteration or medical devices going into people's bodies, but most recently trying to attack and combat the opioid crisis and control and secure the integrity of the closed drug supply chain that we have here in the United States. And when I tell you, having worked firsthand with the men and women that are charged to do this, they go about their duties every day with the intent of protecting the public from unscrupulous criminals who are seeking out vulnerabilities in our supply chain and are, as Director Freeh said, are flooding this country not only with counterfeit prescription drugs that are affecting the most vulnerable in our population, but also the fentanyl, the massive quantities of fentanyl that are coming into our community through our international mail facilities, going to these communities and just devastating those that are subjected to the consequences of overdoses and the deaths.
In leading agents who were charged with protecting the drug supply chain, can you tell us of the circumstance in which they would encounter, or did they encounter, these illegal pill presses?
Sam, this is not, I hate to say this, but this isn't a new phenomenon. The technology has increased and advanced, and we see today what we have is a display of a 3D model of a pill press. But pill presses have been used by criminal organizations for, I would say now, decades. I recall a case that I worked on when I was a prosecutor, where there was an individual who's using a less sophisticated pill press. It started out with a cake batter mixing machine, where he would just take a bunch of ingredients and then had his own pill press that he was operating in Belize, and then pressing hundreds of thousands of Lipitor pills that were then sent into the United States. And this is dating back to the early 2000s. But we've seen the proliferation of the technology, which these advances have made it incredibly difficult for law enforcement to keep up with the number of pills that are flooding our communities.
Would you speak about organizations and individuals who are outside the U.S. who are sending in either the ingredients or the completed pill or the pill presses? Tell us about the challenges of holding those individuals accountable for sending in counterfeit drugs and devices to use those drugs to endanger the safety of Americans.
It's incredibly difficult. Anybody that has worked on an international criminal organization, an investigation leading into either domestic-based individuals working with foreign-based individuals or solely just foreign-based criminal organizations. First, you have to identify the individuals. That's the challenge in itself. Some of these individuals are anonymous, hiding behind these illegal websites that are purporting to be Canadian-based companies selling Canadian-based drugs. As Director Freeh said, when you peel back the layers of that, you know that reality is not true. None of the drugs are actually coming in from Canada. And then it leads to, when you do identify these criminal organizations and individuals, how do you get them here to the United States? Well, there's really two ways of doing it, or three ways actually. They come here voluntarily, not knowing that they're under investigation, and you arrest them when they come through the airport or port of entry. Two, you lure them to the United States under pretenses to come and have a meeting here, and law enforcement can arrest them as part of the criminal investigation. Or third, and more typically, you would send an extradition request to a country to seek that individual's presence here to answer to the crimes that they've been charged with. And as we know, with the flood of fentanyl that's coming in from China, it's almost impossible to enforce any type of agreement and lack of treaty obligations we have with China to secure an individual in China's presence here in the United States to stand to answer to the crimes that they've been charged with. So it's almost an impossibility. And there are also other countries, Sam, that just don't have laws on their books that would allow us to extradite them on the charges that they've been indicted on here in the United States. So U.S. prosecutors would have to figure out actual charges they might be able to bring that would allow an extradition from one of those countries.
And in some cases, certain law enforcement agencies have presence in other countries. Do they have the ability to go out themselves without the permission of the host country to conduct their own investigations if there were leads that, say, for example, there is a manufacturing facility in Guangzhou, China? Can they just go out and make their own, conduct their own investigation?
Absolutely not. The U.S. law enforcement officials cannot operate in a foreign country independent from the foreign country's either approval or working it as a joint operation. So that makes it much more difficult to conduct a proactive investigation in a foreign country, even if you do have a presence. And FDA does have a presence in several countries, but again, if you don't have the cooperation of that country's law enforcement, you're not going to be able to conduct your investigation.
And that magnifies what Your Honor and Director Freeh was talking about, that although it looks like the drug may be actually made in Canada, it comes from somewhere else that's not been expected. In time and time again, Sam, that is the case. There are no drugs that I'm aware of that are, unless you go across the border to a brick and mortar pharmacy in Canada and retrieve those pharmaceutical prescription pills and bring them back over the border. That's about the only way that any drugs that U.S. consumers are receiving from a legitimate Canadian pharmacy. Thank you, George. Now I'd like to turn to a stakeholder, Mr. Greg Jones, who is a compliance senior manager for the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Mr. Jones?
Sure. I work with NABP, National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, which represents the state boards of pharmacy throughout the country. It's a nonprofit organization that supports the board's efforts to protect public health. And we do so through online verification programs such as VIPS, which ensures the integrity of pharmacies selling online medication. Also, the VOD program, Verified Wholesale Distributor Program, which examines the safety of drug supply here in the U.S. We also have a program called the DOT Pharmacy, which is a verification program that issues to qualified websites the .pharmacy domain to identify safe and legal websites. In addition to all the other programs that we have, one program that we have is called a PMP Interconnect, which connects at no charge to the states the data from their prescription monitoring program so that they can share that easily.
Can you tell us why the NAPB decided to become involved in doing this research in this white paper on pill presses?
Certainly. I would like to thank the Partnership for Safe Medicines for leading the effort in bringing this important issue to the attention of the public and to emphasize they are always a leader in focusing attention on the continuing problems with counterfeit drugs, which is ongoing, and it's always something that that we have to be aware of because we do have, as Mr. Freeh indicated, we have a closed system of distribution here in the U.S., and that system, while closed here in the U.S., is always under attack, and this has been going on for decades. Including here in Florida, where lots of efforts were made to curb that. The closed distribution system goes from manufacturer to wholesaler to the pharmacy, typically. What happens is that there are incursions into that system where bad products can be introduced. In this particular situation involving the increase in pill presses, there's a huge confidence that the public has in the prescription drug supply that we have here in the U.S. and the integrity of the medication. And many opiate-dependent individuals seek out a manufactured product because they think that they have the confidence that that is a quality product, which in many cases could be further from the truth, because these are produced in filthy environments with no quality controls, and these pills can have, as we've seen, deadly impact because of the lack of knowing what is put into them.
Now, I'm sure you have received this question before, but if someone were able to acquire a pill press online for, say, $1,000 or more, and able to produce a pill and have produced pills, from the naked eye, have you encountered those situations? And in those situations, have you been able to really determine what is the fake and what is the authentic?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think we've heard already that the technology, especially available through the dark web and the internet, provides a tremendous amount of information in improving the quality of these fakes, and the molds or the dye that's used to produce these products, the quality is increasing dramatically, and it's very difficult to tell the difference between a manufactured product and a fake, and that for a very minimal investment. The dyes, the excipients, the binders, the other materials used to make these are very easily attained, and these pill presses just make it very easy to produce a duplicate of an approved product. Unfortunately, these products are sold, typically on the street. They're sold in a baggie. They're very limited times where you see these in a manufacturer's bottle, which is where part of the problem exists. You're not looking at a manufacturer's container. You don't have the safety that we are putting in place in our country today with the distribution model changing, and over the next few years, our manufacturers, wholesalers, pharmacies will actually be able to trace a bottle with a unique serial number all the way through the distribution system, and that's not the case with these products.
All right, thank you so much for those comments. I want to thank those who are online, who have joined us online, and who are participating in listening to this panel discussion. And also, there are several individuals who are also going to give comments, who are also online, and we'll talk with them later. I'd like to turn to another veteran law enforcement officer, Marc Bachmann, who has some experience working with the DEA. Mr. Bachmann, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes, thank you for, I'm honored and humbled to be part of the panel as well as be present here with you and the ones that you've lost your loved ones here. As you know, that drugs are the common thread with all crimes out here. There's just about no crime that's committed without some type of drug nexus. You know, I served in law enforcement for 35 years, and I can honestly tell you, we're not going to arrest our way out of this. It's not going to happen like that. I served with the Drug Enforcement Administration for 25 years. I was also a state and local police officer, and I was an NCIS agent briefly. My last stop was at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office in charge of the narcotics unit. During that time, my encounters with presses has varied over the years. I was a clandestine laboratory agent in charge of identifying, disrupting, and dismantling organizations that were manufacturing clandestine drugs, primarily methamphetamine, although we did encounter a lot of MDMA labs in the process. Those labs in particular had pill presses, and this is back in the mid to late 90s. To make methamphetamine, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You can go on the internet, you can, there's recipes available. Most people that are making it or manufacturing end up becoming their own best customers. With MDMA, it's a little bit different, or ecstasy. Most of the people that we've encountered and we've arrested had chemistry degrees. They were smart, intelligent people. Why they got into it is the same reason why anybody gets into it, to make money. As you know, the game changer here, as the other panel members have said, is fentanyl. Fentanyl is now the preeminent drug. Most of your people in rehab facilities now are recovering fentanyl addicts. They were heroin addicts, they may have been some type of pill addict, but most of them are opioid fentanyl addicts that are in recovery. It's unfortunate, but now with the onset of these pill presses that are coming in from China, typically what you'll see in the darknet is somebody will order up fentanyl in dosage unit format. It'll get sent over from China in a powder format, go to Canada, it'll get tabbed there and then reshipped back into the United States. Law enforcement focuses on those packages that are coming directly out of China. Most of the clandestine manufacturers and the people that are organizational members that are responsible for that know that, so they send it to reshippers so we don't focus on certain areas where these packagings are coming out of. Again, as the members have said, the stamps and the molds are very authentic. A lot of the pills, will look like Xanaxes, Roxys, oxycodones. The one thing about fentanyl is when you press it into a pill form, it clumps. So it's concentrated in one part of the pill. No one has a specified amount that they put in. You got to remember, these people are crude in what they're doing. They're making money. They're just lacing it with whatever. Finding binder substances, finding other adulterants that look similar so it doesn't change the makeup or the look of the tablet, and then they turn around and sell it and represent it in a counterfeit fashion. And there's a case I think I can discuss here coming up.
What I want, before you get there, wanted to highlight are the molds. How do individuals obtain these molds? Do they have to go to a specific manufacturer to do that? How do they get those molds? Because that is key to be able to make these drugs that look authentic.
There's people that that can manufacture these molds and make them after they look at what they get an idea of the dosage unit. And you may jump in on this, but the molds are actually as counterfeit as well as the pills, they can get it, figure out how to make the mold, and then start pressing them. As I said, with MDMA, back in the 90s, early 2000, most of the pills that we were encountering, they were just scored. They were either yellow, pink in color. A lot of them broke up real easily when you got them in your hands. You know, for a while, raves were very preeminent, and there was a lot of MDMA being distributed in those environments. But now the molds and the stamps are much more authentic, and traffickers get them. A lot of people don't want to have the molds with the actual press. They'll keep them separated because they know once you start putting things together, it's going to draw the attention. They'll put them together when they mass manufacture, and then they'll ship them out.
And so I just want to highlight that these members of law enforcement have experience and talk about the availability of these molds that you can really obtain either on the dark web or on the internet to aid in the manufacture, clandestine manufacture, garage door manufacture, wherever, of these counterfeit drugs. Yes, I would like you to highlight for the audience an operation or operations that you encountered when working, investigating these counterfeit drugs.
So I'll highlight a 2016 investigation that started in Pinellas County. It was called Operation Top Dog Hot Dog. And as you can see, the photographs up there are representative of some of the contraband drugs, as well as the pill press, the amount of monies made that are off of it. Think about this, that a kilogram of fentanyl is about $10,000. The profit on it, if it's marketed right, is about $10 million. So there's nothing to purchasing these pill presses. That's a minor investment. You can get people to throw money in, get the pill press, find a way to get it here. And in many cases, that's how it happened. In this particular investigation, it started out with an undercover purchase of a couple of oxy or roxycodones. At least that's what they thought that they were. They were counterfeit substances. From there, the investigation led to tracking and doing some intensive analysis on phone records, as well as started looking at shipping records, started finding how monies were moving, CTR, SAR transaction, as well as HSI and DEA working in concert with one another, ultimately finding the shipping of pill presses. And in this particular investigation, there were 5 pill presses that were being used. The reason why they called it Operation Top Dog Hot Dog, the 2 gentlemen that were at the top of the organization ran a hot dog stand. What better way to distribute pills, right? You know, you could stand out in front of any retail store and sell your hot dogs along with distributing pills, or at least making the intro to do so. Again, it's hard, arduous work for law enforcement on a federal and state level to track this down. There's always going to be an international nexus, usually with something like this, with China, with Canada, now Mexico, which is a preeminent country that's very responsible for the importation of fentanyl into the United States. As you can see, the large seizures that are occurring at port of entries, especially at our borders. And it doesn't take much. We all know that it's not like cocaine or MDMA or any of these other substances. It just takes a very little amount, and you're impacting lives, killing people. In Duval County alone last year, where I'm from, we had 525 opioid deaths. Most of those deaths, again, I can probably attribute back to fentanyl. Now, the pathology reports, when you look at them, it's a multi-toxicity death. Most of these people are polydrug users, but the ultimate demise is usually attributed to fentanyl. The reason why these pills are so attractive to the consumer or the people that buy it is a lot of people, like with heroin or any other drugs, don't like the idea of using needles, but they will purchase those pills. And that's what makes it a little more acceptable. And it makes it much more acceptable in our youth.
Okay. Thank you so much for those comments. For those who are online, you can also find the white paper on the website of the Partnership for Safe Medicines. And in doing so, you will notice that counterfeit pills have been found in 46 states. So we're not talking about a concentration of 1 or 2 states, but a majority of states. And now I want to change over and let you hear from what these counterfeit pills do and the dangers and problems that results from families and individuals who encounter these drugs by happenstance, by circumstances that you or I would or could have encountered them as well. And I'd like to talk to Ms. Lisa Hicks. Ms. Hicks, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. It's a privilege.
And we have a slide concerning your son, Joe Patterson.
Yes.
And Joe died in February of 2015 after receiving a counterfeit oxycodone. And it's, I think it's important to emphasize, from a friend. And can you tell us a story about your son, Joe Patterson, please?
Joe had asked a friend if he had any pain pills. He had pulled a muscle, and instead of, waiting to go to a doctor, Joe was only 23. He got some pain pills from a long-term friend of his. This young man actually used to date my oldest daughter. We've known him since middle school. He was able to get the counterfeit pills. He didn't know they were counterfeit, obviously. They were oxycodones. That's what they were stamped to look like, was oxycodone. So Joe got the oxycodone, went to another friend's house to just go and play some video games and just hang out because Joe was getting ready to be a father. So he was trying to live his last few days of being a single guy with no children or anything like that. And he was getting ready to be a father to my first and only grandchild. So Joe was, he went over, he was playing with some friends in a town called Gainesville, Georgia. He was playing video games. We don't know if he took half a pill or 1.5 pills, but he later on that evening overdosed. He was with several friends. They panicked. They did not call 911. The hospital was just a couple miles down the road. Joe overdosed and died that evening. His friends reported him and called 911 the day afterwards.
I can only imagine the heartbreak in receiving a phone call that your son had died. How soon did you learn about the cause of his death?
Well, the police didn't know what it was. We had no clue what it was. It was really, really difficult to determine what had caused him to pass away. So but the young man Casey that had given Joe the pills, he had actually taken half of one himself, and he was trying to contact us because he was having an overdose moment too. But he had I found the pills after we got Joe's body back.
So if we can go to the next slide. And so these are pictures that you've provided, and one is a picture of, is that other counterfeit oxycodone pills?
Those are counterfeit oxycodone pills. We received numerous texts from Mr. Trishelle, and I had when I gotten Joe's property back, I went through his wallet and I pulled out that cellophane with those pills in it. I took a picture of them and sent them to the investigator in his death investigation, and I sent him these pictures and said, "You must be looking for these," because they had missed it in their initial investigation. From there on out, I aided the Gainesville Police Department and texting Mr. Trishelle back and forth, investigating his death and taking the actual pills to the Gainesville Police Department.
Now, if I can interrupt you.
Yes.
You said you took an active role and you were communicating with this young man who you knew and the family knew.
Yes.
And in those communications, what did he say with respect to the pills that he had provided to his friend and your son?
He said he thought that they were oxys and he didn't mean to kill Joe.
But he knew that these were counterfeit pills, no question, right?
He knew. Casey was also out on bond in another county for manufacturing and trafficking drugs, everything from meth to marijuana. He was already out on bond for that. It took almost 2 months for the autopsy report to come back with the toxicology report. And once the toxicology report came back and showed that the pills were not oxycodone at all, they were mostly fentanyl. That was when they went and arrested Casey Trishelle for felony murder.
Okay. And so you also provide us with a picture of something that tells us, hopefully, that he was prosecuted and convicted, because he looks like he's in an inmate jumpsuit.
Casey Trishelle was the first prosecuted felony murder in the state of Georgia for a counterfeit pill. We later found out that those counterfeit pills were made from a pill press in the back of a trunk of a car and in a city called Winder, Georgia. Those pills were actually manufactured by a pill press.
Okay.
And Casey Trishelle, he took a plea deal. He'll be eligible for parole in 2030.
Thank you so much for being here to tell everyone the story about how your son, and I'm sure you're reliving that every day, encountered this counterfeit pill.
Well, I'm raising his son now. I'm a mom all over again. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Now I'd like to turn to Carrie Luthor. Good morning, Carrie.
Hi, Sam.
And if we can go to the next slide. And likewise, I know this is tragic, but could you tell us about your son, Tosh Ackerman,
I'd
and what
love to.
happened when he encountered a counterfeit pill?
Yes, I will. So my son Tosh was 29 years old, and he was just like many of you, just a very kind and genuine young man. He had many friends and 3 siblings. He was my second-born child, and very close to his family. He was my go-to guy when it came to San Francisco Giants baseball. And I would call him whenever they made an acquisition or a trade or what have you. And he was just a really extraordinary young man, a very good writer. He was a good athlete, a good student, and a good coworker. And he loved his nieces, who loved him back. I have lots of pictures of them being goofy together, and he had a really good sense of humor. In fact, he often said, "I wish everybody thought I was as funny as I think I am." But that particular day, October 27th, 2015, he'd gone to the beach with a group of friends. He was a very loyal friend. And at the end of the day, they went to one of the friends' homes to watch Monday Night Football. And after that, he headed home. It was probably 10:30. And he called his girlfriend, as he often did when he got home. And they talked for a bit. And then he called her back a couple of hours later because he couldn't sleep. And the reason he couldn't sleep is because he had had a serious case of hives for about 6 weeks. And he'd gone to his physician, and they were trying to figure out what was causing the hives. It was an allergy of some kind, but they didn't know what. And I found out later that he and his girlfriend were planning to go the next day to get blood tests to find out what was causing his hives. Well, he called her because he couldn't sleep. So they talked for another hour, and she told me that he had complained about the itching. So they agreed that he would call her by 11 the next morning. Well, 11 came and went, and he didn't call. And 12:30, and she started feeling annoyed that he stood her up. So she drove up to his house thinking that's not like Tosh. And so she went to the house and ultimately found him in his bed on his stomach. And she touched him, and he was cool to the touch, and rolled him over, and his lips were blue. And so she started CPR, and the paramedics came, and they said they did everything they could, but it had been hours too late. And he,
Did you find out what, and I hate to ask that question.
Yeah, no, it's
What
fine.
was the cause of his death?
yeah, so we found out 9 days later from the coroner, because they had expedited his toxicology report, that he had taken a quarter of a Xanax, what he thought was a Xanax pill, to help him sleep, and it was fentanyl. And they tested the remaining 3/4. That's the actual pill that you're seeing on the screen that was remaining. And the FDA tested it, and it was indeed fentanyl. And they found 14 nanograms of fentanyl in his system from a quarter of a pill of Xanax. And they have known for people to die with as little as 3 nanograms in their system.
And just I want to emphasize, where did Tosh live?
Tosh lived, I'm from Santa Cruz, California, and Tosh lived in that community. He lived with his father up in the Aptos Hills. Beautiful community, born and raised.
And where did Tosh obtain the Xanax pill?
So he got this pill from an acquaintance, a trusted acquaintance that lived in the same area. There was he went to the same high school. He was younger than my son, but same high school as my son, well known in the area, and he trusted him.
Prior to your son's untimely death, were you aware that there were counterfeits in the marketplace?
Well, only to the degree that there were a number of deaths in San Francisco that had happened in the weeks prior to Tosh's death, and that was really the first that I had heard of anything like this being possible. And I believe it was the first incidents in California of that occurring at the university in San Francisco.
And what has happened with respect to that young man who provided Tosh with this deadly counterfeit pill?
Well, they believe that he didn't have any knowledge that it was counterfeit or that it contained fentanyl. I believed that too at the time. He served a year in jail for just selling other illicit drugs and having possession of a weapon. He had a gun. And so he served a year, and that's it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
I would now like to talk to Jennifer Cavallaro.
Yes.
And Jennifer, can you tell us about Maggie Crowley?
Sure. So
And
Maggie,
first of all, tell us how you're related to Ms. Crowley.
Maggie is was my first cousin. Our fathers were brothers. And she was also my parents' goddaughter. She was beautiful, smart, funny, and kind. She had more best friends than I ever even knew was possible. She grew up in a very loving northern New Jersey home, like the most normal life you could possibly have. She moved to upstate New York, where she met her husband, and she worked for Outback. Shortly after they were married in 2014, they decided to move. They wanted to move somewhere warmer, so they decided to move to Florida, Wellington, where I live. She wanted to live close to me, and I was thrilled. She continued to work for Outback. They made her manager. She exceeded. She was very hardworking, always went above and beyond. They were actually, the week that she passed away, they were training her because they wanted to give her her own Outback store, probably in Key West. And at the time, I was like having a fit because I didn't want her to leave Wellington or West Palm Beach and go to Key West. And in my mind, I kept telling myself, oh, when she's done with training, because she'd be training for like a year before she had her own store, I'm gonna talk to her and convince her that she can't go to Key West. She has to stay somewhere between like Palm Beach County or Fort Lauderdale area. So anyway, she had suffered from back injuries like years prior. I know she had a prescription for tramadol. She didn't have any pills left, I believe. She had hurt her back sometime that week at work. She was having a hard time, and she really couldn't miss work because they were training her. So a friend / coworker had given her some pills that I guess she believed were oxycodone. Obviously they weren't. So it was a Thursday. She was off that day. She was home at night. She wasn't feeling that great. Her husband had come home from work. They were contemplating going out to get a bite to eat or whatnot and decided not to. So she was upstairs in her room. I guess he went downstairs to do laundry. She was going to take a shower and relax. He hadn't been upstairs for a while. So I guess he finally went upstairs to check on her, and she wasn't breathing. In the meantime, I was home, like literally lived 4 minutes away. I wasn't feeling good. I had actually been really sick that whole entire week, and that Thursday was the first day I started feeling better. And I just needed to sleep and feel better and get through the weekend. So I was falling asleep, and I happened to look at my phone, and I had a missed call from my cousin Caroline, Maggie's sister. And it was late. It was around 11 o'clock. And I texted her real quick because she would sometimes call me by mistake, just dial me by accident. So I texted her real quick. I'm like, hey, I guess you called by accident. And she's like, no. So I'm like, oh, great. So I call her, and I'm like, hey, are you okay? She's like, no. And I'm like, what's wrong? She's like, well, she was very weirdly calm. She's like, I think Maggie died. And I was like, what? And she was calm in a weird way, and I was screaming at her. I'm like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Do you even know what you're talking about? She goes, I think Maggie died. She goes, but I don't know. She goes, maybe Sean can't wake her up. Can you just please go over there right away? So of course I'm hysterical. I woke up my husband. We literally threw on clothes, flew across the street where she lived. And as I rounded the corner, I knew, because not only were there police cars, there was a medical examiner's van outside. So the whole way there, I kept thinking, I have to call my mom. I have to call my mom. She lives 45 minutes away. My mom has AFib, and I was so afraid to tell her that I thought Maggie died, because if it wasn't true, I thought I was gonna send her to the hospital. So obviously I got there. In the meantime, I looked at my phone. My uncle had just called me, Maggie's father. And I was like, oh God, how am I gonna tell him this? Because I didn't realize that Sean, her husband, had confirmed that she had passed away. So I thought he was calling to ask me if it was true or not. And all I kept thinking was, how am I gonna tell him? How am I gonna tell him?
So Jennifer, I know this is so traumatic. Can you tell us about the individual who you and other family members learned was responsible for making the counterfeit pill that killed your cousin?
So after the toxicology came back in December of that year, they realized there was fentanyl in her system. So obviously, why would it be in her system? It launched an investigation. They wound up, they found out who had given her these pills. It was, like I said, a coworker who had gotten them from another friend of his, who actually, the friend of the friend was getting these pills from a doctor, a spinal surgeon in Vero Beach, Florida. So he was a legitimate spinal surgeon, capable of earning, they said at times, he had years where he legitimately earned $1 million a year as a spinal surgeon and through his practice. And he resorted to actually making counterfeit oxycodone for money, greed.
Did you have an opportunity to attend?
Yes.
He was prosecuted, and did
Yes.
you attend the trial?
We were at his trial every day. It was at the Fort Lauderdale Federal Courthouse, April of last year. And he was found guilty, and he was sentenced to life. The doctor. The other two were also sentenced, but much shorter sentences because they cooperated, and they really wanted to catch where the pills were coming from. And that was a doctor, and he did find out that Maggie had died, and he didn't care. He said she was just another page in a large stack, and there would be others, and it's just the casualties. It's part of the business. So he had no intention of stopping.
Thank you for coming today. I know you drove quite a distance, almost 6 or 7 hours to be here.
I think it was 6.5 hours last night.
And thank you for
and I didn't sleep. So.
Thank you for being here again to tell.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I'm emotional. I can't help it.
You shouldn't apologize. You have nothing to apologize for being emotional about the premature death of a loved one. Now I'd like to talk with Ms. Hodge. And again, it's unfortunate, but it's important to hear the stories of family members that have had loss, immediate loss as a result of family members' encounter of a counterfeit pill. Ms. Hodge, if we can go to the next slide. Can you tell us about your son? And what I also want to point out is that these are stories of people from different walks of the country, from different states, so it's not just concentrated in one state. Can you tell us about your son, Robbie Hodge, who lived in Atlanta, Georgia?
Yes, and I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Your story broke me because it gives me flashbacks to, it's been 2 years, 3 months. Robbie Hodge also had just turned 23. It seems to be a popular age now to lose your child to these fake pills because I'm an advocate and I talk to a lot of people. But as for Robbie, he was such a beautiful, caring, giving, loving kid that everybody loved him. He never had an enemy. Everybody thought that he was their best friend. What happened, it was Thanksgiving weekend of 2016, and that seems to be a very popular pill press time for the pill makers that are on the streets. Our area was covered and smothered that weekend with a lot of death. My son suffered from anxiety. On Friday, he made a doctor's appointment for Monday so that he could be put on something for his anxiety. So that whole weekend, he was really struggling. That was on Friday that he made the appointment. Saturday morning, he's asking me, he's like, Mom, I think I really need to go get psychotherapy or something. And I'm like, Robbie, I don't even know it was hypnotherapy. And I said, what is hypnotherapy? I'm not even sure what that is. And so he was really, really struggling, but I didn't know how bad. So it was on Sunday that he was with some friends that day, and he just felt isolated and so alone. I don't know what was going through his head, but at any rate, he reached out to a friend because he couldn't wait to the appointment for Monday, and he was looking for a Xanax. And this friend said, Robbie, I have white pressies, and they are really good. This was a girl that he had gone to the private Christian academy with throughout high school. These were good kids. But anyway, he went down and he got 5 white pressies. He didn't take it that night. There was more stress to come on the next day, on Monday. On Monday, I lost my nephew to also fentanyl in another county. And I called Robbie and I said, Robbie, Jimmy died. I have to go to Cobb County and with my sister to meet with the coroner. So I was with them, and then when I came home, my son's car was home, and I was happy. It was around 12 o'clock at night. I was like, okay, my son's good. But she dropped me off, and I walk in, and I find my own son dead on the bathroom floor.
Now, Ms. Hodge, I have to ask you, before this, did you have any idea that there were pills that had counterfeit fentanyls? Did you have any idea of counterfeits and the presence of counterfeits out in the marketplace?
I did not know that they were in our area yet. I have been an advocate for those in recovery for a very long time, and so I did study things. And I think I had made a post on Facebook that I felt as if the bad things were headed in our direction in Atlanta. I think I posted about that because I knew in Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, they were all getting so many overdoses from the fake pills. And
again, the resounding theme, it's important to point out, these are not individuals who are addicted to opioids. These are individuals who, by happenstance and by chance, obtained a pill from somebody that they loved. And so I know we're kind of running short on time, but I appreciate you being here to tell the story about your son. And lastly, what happened with respect to the individuals who were responsible for making those drugs that killed your son?
Nothing has happened in our area yet. They have all the information. It's just a very messed up investigation. But the most important part about all of this is that she sold him 5 white Pressies. We did not know at the time when he overdosed what had happened, but my daughter came home from the hospital the next day, and she found the 4 Xanaxes in my home in a little bag. She put them in the kitchen cabinet. We were at the hospital with him in ICU for, they did revive him, but he was brain dead from the time he got to the hospital, so he's pretty much gone. But so she went back to the house and put the Xanaxes up in the cabinet. But after the funeral, when she came home, because she had had a Xanax before in her life, and she's like, "Mom, where are the Xanaxes? I really need one to help me sleep," because it had been so traumatic for a week. And she had said, "Mom, you could probably use one too." And I don't know, but only by the grace of God, I've never had a Xanax. And I was so out of it from the funeral, I couldn't remember where I put them. But by the grace of God, I didn't remember, because had that happened, I would have lost my son. My other daughter could have lost her mother and her sister all in the same week because of one dealer with a fake bill press.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to go to the phone, and I think we have with us Andrea Thomas. Andrea, are you with us? All right. Thank you so much for being willing to be online. Would you tell us about Ashley Romero? And I believe Ashley lived in Grand Junction, Colorado.
Yes, we do. That is where we live. Ashley was 32 years old. She is the oldest of our 4 children. She was a mother. She left behind an 8-year-old son, whom we raised. Her personality, she was, she could walk in a room without a smile and become friends with everybody, just from that one meeting. On June 11th, our daughter passed away a little after midnight. She had a good day. The picture that you see there is actually a week before Ashley died, and her post was, "Today was a good day." That's the seat that Ashley died in her car, coincidentally a week later. When we received this call, it wasn't until 7:30 in the morning, and Ashley had been gone since just a little past midnight. Some friends found her and her boyfriend inside of her car. Ashley wasn't breathing. She was given CPR, and she was dead on scene. After we found out that Ashley had passed, you were in shock and you're not quite sure what to do. We received a phone call from an investigator telling us that he believed Ashley had taken a pill that was laced with fentanyl. There was an investigation in our area during that time because the DEA was familiar with the situation. There were other people dying from fentanyl, but none of them were being reported originally. The first 3 were not reported in our area. And the DEA had actually come into our area to do an investigation on somebody that was up valley from us in Carbondale. When the authorities notified the DEA that some of the evidence they found was linked to these fentanyl pills, they believed, that was what Ashley had died of. When we located her boyfriend, because he did not die from this pill, he was given Narcan and was revived. When we located him, we asked him what he had given Ashley. And some background here is that Ashley had suffered pancreatitis for several years. She was hospitalized many times, and when she would leave the hospital, they would prescribe her maybe 5 oxycodone. Generally, Ashley didn't take these pills when she was released from the hospital.
Now,
My daughter was not a pill taker. Yes, sir.
I want to ask you, so was her boyfriend the individual who provided her with the pills? And if so, did you determine where he obtained the pills that he provided to your daughter?
Yes, he was the one that gave her the pills. He told us that she had had a bout of pancreatitis. She was in severe pain. Ashley did not go to the hospital that evening for her pain. She had changed insurances. And when I asked him how much of an oxycodone he had given my daughter, he said that he had given her half. And I knew that could not have killed my daughter. So I asked him if it was a street drug. He said yes. The following day, he committed suicide. And since that time, luckily he had given the police his statement. And the DEA has since indicted 5 of those people bringing those pills into our country that were pressed illegally.
Okay, we're unfortunately running short of time, but I so much appreciate your sharing this tragic and story that, of course, I'm sure you're living with every day, knowing that your daughter's death was so untimely. Now we'd like to, I think we have another patient advocate, a victim on the line, Rachel Blade. Is Rachel on the line? I'm sorry, Blado? Okay. And while we're connecting, the important story for those who are listening online and everybody in the audience is that it is not, again, limited to a region, a community. It is a scourge that is affecting all of us, every community. 46 states, based upon the white paper study, have all reported deaths related to fentanyl.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. This is Sam Lewis. A pleasure to meet you, even if it's virtual. And thank you for joining us to tell those in attendance here and those online about your son, Joshua Holton, who unfortunately died September 15, 2016. Again, we've had a number of family members talk about the pain of losing a loved one to counterfeit Xanax. And so would you tell us how your son, Joshua, encountered the counterfeit Xanax that took his life?
I will. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm here in Nashville. My son died. My son's name is Joshua, of course. And he died by the hands of a criminal with a pill price. And he was 20 years old. He died 5 days before his 21st birthday. And unfortunately, we had his funeral on his birthday. It was the last celebration we got to have with him. And it was not something foreseen. I woke up one morning and I found my son dead. Friends came over. They were questioned by police. They all said Xanax. My son died 1 year and 3 months after his father and uncle died tragically in a 100-year tide. He was having trouble sleeping. And the Xanax was not Xanax, it was fentanyl.
And would you tell us how he encountered it? Did he encounter this counterfeit pill by purchasing it online?
My son, he streamed TED Talks every night. That's the kind of person he was. He loved TED Talks. He worked full-time. He was a part-time student. He was starting a photography business, and he was starting to trade with my brother. And as he streamed TED Talks, as you subscribe, different videos just come in, and then one came in that he didn't ask for. They just stream in, and it was a professional, an author. He has books written on the topic, and they trusted him. And he was talking about the mainstreaming of the dark net, unfortunately. The friends thought it looked interesting, and they trusted the guy that said it was safe, and it killed my son.
And so he purchased it from an online pharmacy?
Yes, it was Alphabet.
Okay. Well, we're unfortunately over time and running short of time, but I also want to make sure I thank you for your time. And lastly, on the line, we have Kenneth McCall. And Dr. McCall, are you online with us?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Dr. McCall, as an associate professor and director of residency programs and professional affairs at the University of New England's College of Pharmacy, you have some unique perspective with respect to Maine's attempt to pass legislation to legalize importation of pills. Can you tell us about that experience and how counterfeit medicines may play a role with respect to that?
Thank you. Yes, I want to commend the NABIPSM for such an important paper. This lack of international regulation of pill presses is particularly problematic when politicians start proposing programs like foreign drug importation. We tried foreign drug importation in Maine in 2013, and right away, after passing our importation law at the state level, I ordered 3 medications that were advertised by a foreign entity claimed to be from Canada. I ordered Plavix, Celebrex, and Nexium from a company called Canada Drug Center. What I received in the mail didn't actually come from Canada. It came from 3 other countries that were not allowed by state importation law, from Mauritius, Turkey, and India. We tested these medications in our university lab and found that these medications were all substandard, either due to less than the label amount of the active ingredient or due to a contaminant. We had a Maine patient taking the counterfeit blood thinner that I received. They might have had a clot that led to a stroke. I doubt anyone would suspect that the medication was to blame in that situation. In fact, there might not even have been medication left to test at that point. I hope this paper opens people's eyes in Florida and across the nation to how much safer the U.S. drug supply is and how ready the world's criminals, including those that claim to be Canadian pharmacies, are able to take advantage when we take advantage of our citizens.
Dr. McCall, thank you for your comments, and I want to thank everyone here in attendance. I know we have run long, but I think it was important to get hear from all the panelists and their different perspectives. Again, thanks to the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators, and the Partnership for Safe Medicine's effort to highlight the concern with respect to pill presses. A copy of the paper is, of course, online. There is a video of the making of a pill press, and there are different resources, information about our victim advocates, if the press wants to talk with them afterwards, and also our press contact, Farina Mustafa. You can contact them at farina@safemedicines.org. Again, thank you all. Thank for those who are also online who took the time to stay with us to listen to this important message. Thank you.
Thank you.